Why do so many of us wait for crisis, trauma, disease, diagnosis, betrayal, or even loss to finally make up our mind to change? I believe that we can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or we can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. Which will you choose? Every one of us has done something great in our lives. And what happened when we decided to make up our mind to create something or to do something differently? We ask ourselves the question, is it possible that I can be healthy? Is it possible that I can have the job of my dreams or the relationship of my dreams? And what would that look like? And when you ask that question, you turned on the creative center in your brain called your frontal lobe. And think of your frontal lobe as the symphony leader. And it has connections to all parts of the brain. So what it does is it naturally calls up different networks of neurons that are associated with that question based on the things you've learned intellectually in your life and the experiences that you've had as well. And it begins to seamlessly piece them together. The next thing you see is an image or a picture in your mind, and that's called intention. And now you are selecting a new possibility of your future. When you saw that image, you saw that picture in your mind, the next thing you know, you started to feel the emotion as if you were living in that future reality in the present moment. And we could say then, the moment you started feeling the emotion, the thought became the experience in your mind. And you were giving your body a sampling or a taste of the future. Now here's what you did when that happened. You started thinking about all the choices you had to make, and you wrote them down. You started to think about all those experiences that would get you to that vision, all those goals. And every time you wrote those goals down, you felt more of those feelings. And you kept reviewing them in your mind so you can put your conscious mind on what you wanted. And then you did something really brilliantly. You started to write down the thoughts that you wouldn't let slip by your awareness unnoticed. Thoughts like, I can't, it's too hard, I'll never change. Those are thoughts that if you respond to them will cause you to lose sight of your future. And every day you reminded yourself of who you wanted to be, and every day you reminded yourself of who you no longer wanted to be. And then you started seeing synchronicities, opportunities, coincidences beginning to show up in your life. And that's the universe telling you that you're heading towards a new future. And when it finally happened, it was no longer about the event. It was about the fact that you created it. And so then the side effect of that is we become more whole, more present, more loving, because now we're living life less and less. There's only three things that stop us from that vision of the future: the body, the environment, and time. Number one, the body. Most people say, I didn't feel like it, or I don't feel like it, I'm tired, I have a headache, and they use feelings as a barometer for change. And when you use feelings as a barometer for change, you'll always talk yourself out of possibility. The environment. I have these people to see, I have these places to go, I have these things to do. Their environment seduced them back into their present reality. The last one is time. There just wasn't enough time. And people shrink back into mediocrity, and they find people that do the same. And then they use each other to reaffirm their addiction or their conditioning into victimization. So then when you're at that lowest level in your life, where they don't want to keep their social engagements, they could actually see themselves through the eyes of someone else. And in neuroscience, that's called metacognition. And now they're beginning to observe their thoughts. They're beginning to notice their behaviors. They're looking at the feelings that they were living by and saying, I didn't even know I was suffering. It just feels like how I always lived. And the act of observing those states of mind and body means they're no longer the program. Now they're the consciousness observing the program, and that's the first step to change. If you went to a football game and something happened favorable to the home team, and everybody was clapping at the same time and applauding, That would be incoherence in the brain. Now, normal coherence in the brain would be like every 10th person in the stadium clapping in rhythm. And that's normal or average for most human beings. But when the brain and heart get highly organized, highly integrated, highly synchronized, imagine everybody in the stadium clapping at the same time in rhythm. Not only does it create order and coherence, but it also increases the amount of energy in the brain and heart. I want to show you the difference between coherence and incoherence. On the left image where it says coherence, you're looking at the top of their head. Now, 19 different compartments of the brain that are connected through electrodes, and if all of those compartments are synchronized, you'll see the valleys and the peaks all lined up, and we'll call that order or coherence. If different parts of the brain are lagging or behind or out of order, then you'll see all of a sudden some of those valleys lining up with some of the peaks, and different compartments of the brain are not communicating well with each other, and we call that incoherence. When we see a lot of blue when we're measuring coherence, it means it has a low level of coherence in the brain. If you don't see any blue and you see pink, that's normal. And normal means average, what the average person experiences in terms of coherence. The red represents a high amount of order in the brain, and red means there's a super level of coherence. So now, this is a normal brain scan. This is what we call a strip chart. And we're measuring the 19 different parts of the brain. That brainwave pattern is low-level beta brainwave patterns. Now, the person's sitting there, their eyes are open, they're being their normal self. We ask them to close their eyes, begin to open their awareness, begin to open their focus from a convergent focus to a divergent focus or a broad focus. In a matter of seconds, this is what we see. Now remember, coherence is orderliness, and look how those waves are organized and stacked equally on top of each other. The brain is highly synchronized or phase synchronized in alpha brainwave states. Here's another one. Another person goes from a narrow focus to a broad focus, and you can see the entire brain is coherently in alpha brainwave state. Here's another person who has global coherence. They go from a narrow focus to a broad focus, from a convergent focus to a divergent focus, and you can see all of those different brainwaves beautifully stacked on top of each other, and we can say that the brain is highly integrated. If you look at that arrow on the right side of the screen, you can see that all of those peaks are lining up. That means the entire brain is in an alpha coherent state. In this slide, you're seeing someone in phase synchronized, coherent theta brainwave patterns. The entire brain is synchronized into theta, and they're in that hypnotic state. They're in that suggestible state where the lights are out in the thinking neocortex. And when they slip into that theta brainwave state, we can say that they're completely beyond themselves, and they've dissociated from everything known in their three-dimensional reality. Our research, as well as other researchers at Princeton University and around the world, have found that if you can broaden your focus, as you begin to open your awareness, the act of taking your attention off of everything material and putting your attention on nothing but space. If reality is both a particle and a wave, if it's matter and energy, and there's an invisible field of energy called the quantum field that exists beyond this space and time, that you can't experience with your senses, but can only experience with your awareness, and that unified field, that invisible field of frequency, that is that very frequency that connects everything material and organizes everything into form. So then when you broaden your focus and you take your attention off of matter, you're putting your attention on that invisible field of energy, whose signature is oneness, whose signature is order, whose signature is greater and greater levels of wholeness. The person is feeling so whole, so in love with life, that it's impossible for them to want. I mean, how can you want when you feel whole? You feel like you have everything. And so we've measured this on people. And in fact, we can actually predict when it's going to happen to a person. We start seeing more and more order taking place in the brain, and all of a sudden we can say after a certain point, this person is going to have a very transcendental moment. And when we see those two hemispheres coming together, when that person is connecting and they feel whole, energy moves right into their heart, and their heart starts beating very orderly and very coherently. The heart begins to produce an ambient magnetic field. Now, the field and the energy is beginning to broaden from the body. And that energy is frequency, and that frequency carries information. And now the person feels connected to something greater. And you can walk around and look at that person, and you can see tears of joy rolling down their face because they feel so whole, they feel so in love with life, that they feel connected to something greater, that I call that the natural state of being. So what does it mean then to get beyond the self? If we're getting beyond the analytical mind and cooling off brain activity that's associated to everything familiar in our life, that means then, in order for you to get beyond yourself, you're going to have to take your attention off of everything material and known in this three-dimensional reality. And our research shows that when you go from a somebody to a nobody, from putting your attention on some things to putting your attention on nothing, to putting your attention from somewhere to nowhere, when you're putting your attention from sometime into no time, that is the moment you're disconnecting from this three-dimensional reality. And in a sense, we call that getting beyond the self. And now, at this elegant moment, you are on the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And we could say now, you're at that perfect place in the eternal now for you to begin to create something new from the unknown. Why? Because if you have no attention on the predictable future or the familiar past, if you have no attention on anything material in your outer environment, on no one or nothing or nowhere, and you've gotten beyond your body, which has been conditioned to be the mind, the only thing that you are in that moment is pure consciousness. And when you're pure consciousness, dissociated from everything material in your life, now you're at the perfect place